For the sake of this video, I need to use something that's pretty visible on screen, because if you look at a path, they're actually just thin little black lines, and they don't really show up in a recording very well. For your paintings though, you're going to be using the pen tool and working in the path palette, and they will not have a fill or a stroke like the example I'm about to show. And as you can see, if you have multiple paths, selecting those path layers will temporarily make the paths visible, so you can sort of keep them separated. So let's go over the basics of how the pen tool works to create these shapes. With the pen tool selected, I am making a shape. It has a fill but no stroke, and then I'll just make it more visible for you on screen. So you can click to lay down a point. You can click again and keep clicking to lay down sort of straight lines between your points. Or you can click and drag to create a curve between your points. The nice thing is that you can have a combination of both curved lines and straight lines. So I can break this curve and make straight lines, and then make my next one a curve, and follow that up with an additional curve. And then I can break it and make straight lines again. So if you've ever used the polygon lasso or the normal lasso tool, you might already like that this combines the best of both. It allows you to have both organic lines and hard edges. But the real value is when you can begin manipulating these. Each of these shapes, currently on their own layer, is not like a bitmap layer. I can move these around, I can free transform them, they will not lose quality. Moreover, I can use the direct selection tool to take these points that I laid down and to move them. Once again, I am not losing any quality. Furthermore, using the pen tool, I can convert angles into curves. I can convert curves back into angles. In fact, you're not even limited to the original number of points that you've laid down. If I want to add more detail, I can hover with the pen tool over a line segment, click, and there I have an additional point that I can control. Once again, I can turn that into a hard angle, holding the Alt key, or I can hold the Alt key, click and drag, and it becomes a curve again. Now you've noticed I've been switching back and forth between the pen tool and the direct selection tool. Well, if you really like efficiency, and you know I'm a huge fan of keyboard shortcuts, you can actually keep the pen tool active the entire time and temporarily pull out the direct selection tool. So let's see what that looks like. Say I wanted to move this point around. Normally that would be the direct selection tool, but instead I can just hold down Control. You can see my cursor changes. Then I can have the direct selection tool as much as I want. And as soon as I let go of Control, I'm back to the pen tool. Just like using the hand tool with the spacebar, this is a sort of temporary tool swap that'll really allow you to just focus and not worry about using the interface. With the path selection tool, you can select entire paths, hold down Alt, drag, and duplicate them. You can also use free transform and cut and paste just like you'd expect. Now, for whatever reason, one of the major pitfalls that people run into when working with paths is trying to create two humps in a row. So this is one hump, this is two humps, and maybe your shape looked like that. What artists often end up with is they get the first one correct, and then they go to make the second one, and they have this, and this is not what you want. So the thing to remember here is that it will default to stringing your curves together in sort of an organic shape. If you don't want that, you have to break the tangent. So we'll go back to my original hump here, and you can see it has two handles, one at the top and one at the bottom. If I hold down Alt and click, the one at the bottom disappears, and that indicates that I've broken the tangent. Now the next point that I lay down will not be continuing. It will be sort of its own shape. So I could make two humps, I could make angles, anything I want. It's essentially telling Photoshop to ignore the incoming direction of the curve and to just start from scratch. Now you don't necessarily always want to break your tangents, because you can have some nice results by stringing together smooth curves into one another. It's a way to have a very pleasant shape. If you want to have some very organic result, this is often your best example. And if you don't get it right the first time, you can always zoom in, use your direct selection tool, select any point, and then modify these handles. You can make them longer to ease the tension, or bring them in closer to your anchor point to make a tighter fall off. And this is one of those things that just takes practice getting used to. And for that reason here, I've included a tracing sheet. This is found in the resources folder, and I just encourage you to try and trace these shapes using the pen tool. It might seem hard at first, but getting the hang of this is very worthwhile. The next thing to understand is the difference between vector shapes and paths. And there's really not much distinction. It's really a question of where do they live. Because remember, our goal is to keep a lean layer stack. We want to keep this pretty clean, and right now it's already getting cluttered. Instead, we want to offload them into the paths palette. Currently, my paths palette is empty, even though I have a bunch of vector shapes. So watch what happens when I select one of these vector shapes. Here on my layer stack, shape number 4 is selected, and then temporarily in the paths palette, you can see there is shape 4 shape path. Well, if I want to have that stay permanently in my path palette, I'm going to need to define it as a path, because as you can see, when I select a different layer, it disappears. So once again, I'll select shape 4, and I'll click on the shape 4 shape path temporary layer here, and drag it down to the little new path icon, and then let go. And that one that says copy at the end will now stay in the paths palette. Here you'll see I select the background layer, so I definitely do not have any of my vector shapes selected, and yet this new path that I created lives in the palette. So really this is just a roundabout way of saying that once you've created your paths and they're in the path palette, you've now totally separated that from your layer stack. So let's see why this is important. If I were to just paint some random stuff here, and I've lost that edge that I tried so carefully to make, since I have saved paths, I can just recall them. So let's say I want the one with the 2 little humps. I control click on that paths layer, and now I have a selection. So I could paint on that same layer in that shape. And I could use any kind of brush I wanted. This is just basic layer control stuff. But I have not lost that selection. I could even be working on a single layer, call up the other selection, and begin to paint. So you can see what this gives me is a very lean layer stack and the ability to recall complicated selections with the paths palette. So let's take a look at how this works in an actual illustration. Something I'll commonly do is add a background element. So say I wanted to add a little waterfall. It's going to start above this bridge and it's going to continue down below it. So I'd make the best results with long, smooth strokes, and I'd be drawing over top of this midground element. Well, I have a selection for that. I'm going to get my paths here, select the background, and then I could use a mask. So in this case, anything I draw on the layer is only in the background, and I don't have to worry about messing up my foreground. So you can see how spending a little time at the beginning to set up these paths saves you tons of time when it comes to actually painting. Well, what if these 6 or 7 paths just aren't enough and you want to make some more complex selections? Well, in the next video, we're going to talk about selection building.